Let's talk about the League of Nations, history's first big attempt at a global please don't shoot each other club, born from the ashes of World War I. Its founding document, the Covenant, was full of grand ideas about collective security. The concept was simple: if one nation attacks another, everyone else dogpiles the aggressor. It was a beautiful idea, like a kindergarten friendship pact scaled up to global geopolitics. The problem was, nobody actually wanted to do the dogpiling. When Japan invaded Manchuria in 1931, the League expressed its grave concern. When Italy gassed its way through Ethiopia in 1935, the League imposed sanctions so weak they were basically a sternly worded letter. The League had all the moral authority of a substitute teacher, and everyone knew it. So, with the world merrily sliding into a second, even bigger global catastrophe, you'd think people would give up on the whole idea. Nope. In August 1941, Winston Churchill and Franklin D. Roosevelt met secretly on a warship off the coast of Newfoundland. While U-boats prowled the Atlantic, these two men drafted the Atlantic Charter. It was a list of principles for a better world after the war: no territorial gains, self-determination, free trade. It was breathtakingly optimistic, basically a wish list for a planet that had never existed. They were literally planning the architecture of post-war peace from the deck of a battleship, which is the historical equivalent of designing a fire escape while you're still inside the burning building. Fast forward to the Yalta Conference in 1945. The Big Three, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin, got together to hash out the future. Roosevelt, frail and dying, was the desperate idealist, clinging to the hope of a cooperative world order. Churchill was the grizzled imperialist, mostly concerned with preserving the British Empire, which was already crumbling. And then there was Stalin, a man whose entire career was a masterclass in paranoia, purges, and tactical cruelty. These were the architects of global harmony. They agreed on the basic idea of a united nations, but their motivations couldn't have been more different. It was like a wolf, a lion, and a sheep deciding what's for dinner. The most brilliant, and by brilliant I mean disastrously cynical, invention of the UN was the Security Council. This was the core of the whole thing. Roosevelt's concept was the four policemen: the USA, UK, Soviet Union, and China. France was later added, mostly because Churchill insisted and, well, pride. But here's the genius part. They gave themselves veto power. This meant that any one of these 5 permanent members could single-handedly block any action. It was a system designed to stop wars unless one of the people who designed the system wanted to start one. It's like hiring 5 security guards for a museum and giving each one a key to turn off the alarm system whenever they feel like stealing a painting. With the big ideas settled, the real fun began, the Dumbarton Oaks Conference in late 1944. This is where diplomats got down to the nitty-gritty. The glorious vision of world peace met the brutal reality of committee meetings and procedural debates. They argued about everything. The most absurd argument was over membership. Stalin, in a bold opening bid, demanded that all 16 Soviet Socialist republics get individual seats in the General Assembly. This would have given him 16 votes. To everyone's credit, they talked him down. He settled for just 3, the USSR plus the Ukrainian and Belarusian SSRs. A stunning diplomatic victory that only required accepting that 2 pieces of a country were somehow also countries themselves. Finally, in April 1945, delegates from 50 nations gathered in San Francisco to sign the official UN Charter. The mood was electric with hope. A German leader, recently defeated, was not present. The war in Europe was literally ending as they debated. Speakers gave soaring speeches about the dawn of a new era. President Truman, brand new to the job after Roosevelt's death, told the delegates, "You have created a solid structure upon which we can build a better world." What he didn't mention in his speech was that just days earlier, he'd been fully briefed on a secret project to build a weapon capable of destroying an entire city. The ink on the peace charter was barely dry, and the world was about to enter the atomic age. The timing was, shall we say, impeccable. If you ever want a dose of powerful, tragic irony, just read the preamble to the UN Charter. "We, the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war." It's beautiful stuff. To reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person. Pure poetry. This document was signed by nations that were, at that very moment, violently suppressing independence movements in their colonies, operating secret police states, and enforcing racial segregation by law. The Charter wasn't a description of the world as it was a description of a fantasy world that none of its signatories actually lived in. It was the planet's collective New Year's resolution, and we all know how those turn out. A few years later, in 1948, the UN produced another masterpiece of idealism, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Spearheaded by Eleanor Roosevelt, it laid out 30 fundamental rights that every human being should have. The right to life, freedom from slavery, freedom of expression. It's a genuinely magnificent document. The only tiny, insignificant little problem is that it's completely non-binding. It's a suggestion. The declaration was adopted with 0 dissenting votes, but 8 countries abstained. Guess who? The Soviet bloc, Saudi Arabia, and apartheid South Africa. Basically, all the countries who looked at a list of basic human rights and said, "I'd rather not commit to that, thanks." In its early days, the UN wasn't a total wash. It helped mediate a conflict between Indonesia and the Netherlands. It sent observers to watch over a ceasefire in Kashmir. Small wins. But then came its first truly massive test, the British Mandate in Palestine. In 1947, the UN General Assembly voted to partition Palestine into separate Arab and Jewish states. It was a well-intentioned attempt to solve an impossible problem by drawing lines on a map. The result was the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, and the start of a conflict that the UN has been passing resolutions about ever since. For its very first major geopolitical intervention, the UN managed to create a problem that is, let's check our watches, still not solved. Off to a roaring start. The UN's most decisive military action ever happened completely by mistake. In June 1950, North Korea invaded South Korea. The United States wanted the Security Council to authorize a military response. Normally, the Soviet Union would have instantly vetoed this, but they couldn't. Why? Because they weren't there. The Soviet ambassador was boycotting the Security Council meetings. He was protesting the UN's refusal to give Communist China a seat to, Communist China. So while the Soviet representative was sitting in his office in a fit of pique, the Security Council voted to go to war. The UN's most powerful moment was enabled by an empty chair. This is not generally a sign of a robust, functional system. If Korea was the accident, the 1956 Suez Crisis was the system working exactly as designed. Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal, which really upset its former colonial overlords, Britain and France. So they, along with Israel, invaded Egypt, a clear act of aggression. The UN Security Council tried to pass a resolution demanding a ceasefire. And who vetoed it? Britain and France. They literally used their superpower to block the world from telling them to stop their own illegal invasion. It was the most shameless use of the veto imaginable. The US and the USSR, in a rare moment of agreement, were both furious. The crisis only ended when the US threatened Britain with economic collapse. The UN was If Korea was the accident, the 1956 Suez Crisis was the system working exactly as designed. Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal, which really upset its former colonial overlords Britain and France. So they, along with Israel, invaded Egypt, a clear act of aggression. The UN Security Council tried to pass a resolution demanding a ceasefire. And who vetoed it? Britain and France. They literally used their superpower to block the world from telling them to stop their own illegal invasion. It was the most shameless use of the veto imaginable. The US and the USSR, in a rare moment of agreement, were both furious. The crisis only ended when the US threatened Britain with economic collapse. The UN was reduced to a helpless spectator, just as its architects had secretly intended. So, was the whole thing a joke from the start? A cynical talking shop designed to do nothing? Not exactly. The idealism was real, at least for some. The UN's specialized agencies like UNICEF and the World Health Organization have saved millions of lives. Its peacekeepers, however flawed, have kept fragile truces from shattering. The UN was founded on a fundamental, glorious, and completely unworkable contradiction: the idea that sovereign nations, driven by self-interest, would voluntarily submit to a higher authority for the common good. It doesn't work. It was never going to work. But the fact that we're all still showing up to the meetings, still drafting the angry resolutions, still pretending the ideal is possible, maybe that's the whole point. The foundation isn't solid, it's aspirational, which is a polite way of saying it's built on sand, but with a really nice view. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more historical insights. Thanks for watching, nerds!